degree, sophomore at HFCI, and now he has to do his office every other year, just like the rest of us. So, in 2011, he became chief of the GEB, Genetic Epidemiology Branch. He's in the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics at the NCI. He's going to talk to us today about epidemiology, translational research, and clinical oncology. Take it away, Neil.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to give you folks a broad overview of epidemiology and a little bit about the basics, but I'm also going to touch on some of the directions that epidemiology is mutating into. So I have a fair number of slides, and I'm not going to go into depth in all of them. You'll be happy to know, but I'll try and emphasize the ones that are most entertaining. So I'm going to touch on some introductory concepts, some tools, some things that epidemiologists have actually accomplished, and what the challenges are and where we're going. So a few foundations. Let me start off by saying that our group is located in NIH, in the National Cancer Institute, and we're part of the intramural program. Those of you are in the Clinical Center in CCR, and we're part of the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics. And right now I'm chief of the Genetic Epidemiology Branch. We have a number of other branches that work on the environmental side. So there are a number of branches that investigate genetic causes of cancer, and a number of others that investigate environmental causes of cancer. And of course our division is generally dedicated to the etiology of cancer or causes of cancer, and that's pretty much the general theme of epidemiology. So there's our logos. What does DCEG do? Environmental and genetic causes of cancer, high quality, high impact, evaluated research. We have studies all over the world, and studies tend to emphasize molecular epidemiology, and I'll tell you a little bit about what my view of molecular epidemiology is and what it means. And so our studies have had a lot of impact on regulatory changes in our water, gasoline, diesel exhaust, farming chemicals. We have specific studies in each of these areas. And every one of these studies has had a fairly dramatic, you could spend a whole hour talking about any one of these studies. So the diesel study, for example, actually was investigated a number of times because there are important chemical interests in this country that really don't want to have anybody regulating the use of diesel exhaust. So the head of the Occupational Studies Branch was called to testify before Congress 4 separate times to defend that study. So epidemiologists have to contend with the political dimensions to their work. Safer farming, it seems like such an innocuous thing. You just put the line up there, safer farming. Well, there's a study, a giant cohort study called the Agricultural Health Study that investigates pesticides and herbicides. And that study conflicts with gigantic corporate interests like Monsanto that want to produce agricultural chemicals and don't really want them to be particularly regulated. And so there's similar kinds of conflicts there. We investigate cancer susceptibility syndromes on the genetic side, second cancers among cancer survivors, preventive interventions. The radiation epidemiology branch investigates the impact of medical radiation, et cetera, et cetera. During the last year, a large study has been launched to investigate whether 2 or 1 doses of HPV vaccine is as effective as 3 doses. And you can imagine that this has an enormous impact on public health. If you can prevent cervical cancer by doing only 1 vaccination, it's much, much easier, less expensive, and easier to implement than 2 or 3 injections. Okay, so there's collaborations all around the world, and look at all the little dots, is that impressive? And you can go to our website and find out all the kinds of studies that are being done. If any of you are interested in epidemiology as a career path, you can learn about the hundreds of different studies in different areas that are ongoing. And there's risk assessment tools, and risk assessment is a big deal, particularly if you want to screen for cancer. One of the discoveries that's come out of our group over the last few years is a quantitation of the idea that if you are going to screen for cancer, say lung cancer, to do that efficiently, you really want to identify the people at highest risk for that screening. It seems like common sense, but to show this, there's a series of papers, including in New England Journal, that actually show this rigorously and mathematically, that you want to generate a risk model, and then you want to show with that risk model that you're going after the people at highest risk to do your screening efficiently. So how do you do that with lung cancer, for example? Well, you want to identify the characteristics of smoking, for example, that are most associated with lung cancer. And then you want to know, well, what other features are also most associated with the risk of getting lung cancer? Things like, do you have COPD, how old you are, your family history of lung cancer, and a factor that our group identified, which is called time to first cigarette. So if the amount of time that between when you get up And when you smoke your first cigarette, if it's less than 5 minutes, your risk of lung cancer, after taking everything else into account, is 3 or 4-fold higher than someone that waits over an hour for their first cigarette. So all those things need to be incorporated in an efficient risk model, and that makes screening efficient. And although the National Lung Cancer Screening Trial showed that there's a 20% reduction in mortality with helical CT screening, the economics of introducing CT screening is really difficult and expensive, and you're not going to do it unless you have a better risk model. So that's what I'll touch on it. Okay, so some introductory ideas. Epidemiology refers to populations and disease in populations as opposed to medicine, which is disease in individuals, and it's an observational science as opposed to an experimental science. The idea being that we might look at a population and identify some individuals who are smokers and some individuals who are non-smokers. However, we don't give cigarettes to people and say we want you to smoke those and we want you to not smoke. That would not be ethically permissible. So that's one of the distinctions between an observational and an experimental science. And it's a particular methodologic weakness that those who don't like the particular conclusions that epidemiologic studies come to often criticize. And those are usually individuals that have an interest in the outcome, for example, tobacco companies. So when tobacco companies criticized the first case control studies of cigarettes, they said, it's an observational study, and so the results are not reliable, and we don't believe them, and you all should just keep on smoking. So this is really the point I just made, that epidemiologists are ethically prohibited from doing experiments on people. And this weakness was exploited by tobacco companies. Consequently, epidemiologists are concerned with the idea of establishing causality, because what our study designs allow us to do is formulate statistical associations, and those associations can be quite strong, but they may not be mechanistically compelling. And so we like to assemble evidence from other domains to make those arguments as compelling as possible. I'll give you some examples as we go forward. So the goals of epidemiology generally: identify the causes of cancer, quantify the risks, elucidate the mechanisms where possible. Epidemiologists are always traditionally been concerned with public health. So you'll hear the statement all the time that, the people who cleaned up the drinking water saved more lives than all the physicians, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But epidemiologists really do have a public health orientation and take this very, very seriously. Epidemiologists emphasize prevention. So lots of examples of this: vaccines, all sorts of interventions that prevent disease. There are a number of downsides, though, to prevention that I'll have to be frank with you about. One thing about prevention is it takes time, and it's very expensive to demonstrate that a preventive intervention is effective. And it's not very dramatic. You can't really see the disease that you've prevented. You don't have a grateful person that comes to you and says, "Thank you for saving my child," because frankly, they don't know that the vaccine saved their child. They kind of take it for granted. And if their child 10 years later develops a rash, well, maybe it was your vaccine that did it, so they're not always so grateful. And this translates to political impact. So dramatic treatments are very effective with politicians, whereas preventive interventions tend to be more difficult. And so it really takes a certain amount of, both intelligence and real orientation towards public health to be dedicated to this. And also you have to be willing to fight political opposition. So whereas years ago we had tobacco companies, and that's a little bit passé, now you have companies that pretty much advocate processed foods and foods that have no nutritional value but basically are pure sugar, and are marketed to kids, and contribute to the obesity epidemic. And so it's very clear that obesity is strongly related to diabetes, heart disease, and 8 different cancers. So it's going to take probably a generation to develop that public health consciousness and have kind of interventions that will be effective. In the meantime, all of those companies are fighting tooth and nail to prevent that from happening. And the same thing with polluters and companies that make chemicals. So you really are in a political battle. And finally, Nobel Prizes. So in spite of the fact that the discovery that tobacco was the cause of lung cancer, and tobacco in the next century will likely cause 1 billion. That's 1 billion with a B, excess deaths. Okay, so roll that number around in your mind a little bit. 1 billion. 1 billion with a B. Gosh, that's a lot of deaths. Okay, that's more than the number of deaths that a lot of other causes. Nevertheless, the discoveries, and then we go through a lot of discoveries. We can have a whole talk on just a series of discoveries about tobacco. No Nobel Prizes for that one. For some reason, the scientific plus the political fight to do that was not considered as important as, say, blowing in the wind, or, I don't know, that's a joke. Whatever the latest selected to win the Nobel Prize, so the latest medical Nobel Prize. So what are some of the concerns that epidemiologists have? One is bias, which is a systematic deviation from truth. And an example of a kind of bias is participation rates. So epidemiologists are very worried about participation rates because if you have a low participation rate in a study, the subjects that are in the study are not going to be very representative of the general public. And you generally want the people in your study to be able to generalize the results from your study to the wide world out there. If you can't do that, your results are of limited value. So that's an important thing. And in fact, if you take a careful look at many, many studies, the results aren't so generalizable. So let me give you an example. The UK Biobank. Now, if I said to you, is that a representative study? Do you think about it, well, that's the general population of the United Kingdom, and it's associated with the healthcare system? Yeah, that sounds like it'd be pretty representative. In fact, less than 15% of the people that are invited to participate in that study actually do participate. And you have to wonder, why is that? Well, maybe they don't want to give blood. Maybe they don't want to participate in a questionnaire that takes an hour. Maybe they just don't want to be bothered. You know, maybe they've been drinking a lot, and they're like, I have a headache today. You know, well, I don't want you to know how much I drink. Or whatever the reason is, they may not be so representative of the general population. And whatever the reason is, it detracts from the generalizability of that study. So compromises always have to be made, but it is something you need to keep in mind. So I'll give you one example from real life. In 2003, we did what at the time was the largest lung cancer study in the world. And we had site visitors that came, and they said, look, if you can't get a high participation rate, we're not going to give you the $8 million you need to do the study. And so we said, okay, we'll do a pilot study to get a high participation rate. And the first thing we did was a phone survey. We called up people and said, hey, we got a study for you. You get to give blood and do a questionnaire, and it's a really great study. What do you say? 30% of people said they'd participate, and that was not high enough. So then we sent them an invitation letter. We followed up by phone. We said if you're in the hospital, it's okay. We put advertisements in the hospitals and in magazines. We offered them a cash award in gasoline, which in Italy at the time was a big deal. We got their physicians to write a letter, and we said we'd come to their home. That got it up to 49%. Still no good. We could not have done the study. So then we got new interviewers. So for the men, we got attractive nurses. And for the women, we had male nurses. We had the physicians call. We gave them gas coupons. As I say that already, instead of money. We had ads on TV by a very popular night show host. We had a better invitation letter that was written at a 4th grade level instead of a more sophisticated level. We got a letter from the mayor. That mayor was very popular. And we had a 1-800 line. With those innovations, we got a 73% participation rate, which was adequate. But it was really hard to do. That pilot study over a year took about $1 million. So it's not easy to do a study to get just something to keep in mind. Okay. Epidemiologists worry about the controls in your study. Population controls are really expensive. What's population control? Population control is representative of the population. And the issue with population controls is that it's impossible to get them these days. In the past, you used to use RDD, which is random digit dialing. Now, if you do random digit dialing, every one of you knows you've got a landline. You get a nuisance call, what do? You don't look at it. You hang up. It's like, don't bother me. So it's incredibly hard to get good controls. And so you have to make compromises. It's a really difficult thing. And when you read about high response rates in papers, and you say, well, what was their response rate? Was their response rate really 70%? You need to be very critical when you believe them, because it's very hard to get. It was hard 10 years ago in Italy. It's even harder today to do that. And I don't have time to tell you about all the theoretical advantages of good controls, but there are advantages. Okay. If you call an epidemiologist because you have a study and you'd like some help, the epidemiologist is going to ask you about your study design, where your controls came from. Do you have covariates? An issue I get all the time is somebody applies to use the PLCO or the NLST biospecimens. And they say, I have a fabulous marker for lung cancer. Could I please have some serum from the National Lung Cancer Screening Trial, because I'm going to test it versus your controls, and I know that my marker is spectacular to detect lung cancer, because we tested it in some lung cancers already, and it picked up the lung cancers. So my first question is, did you adjust for confounders? And they say, well, what's a confounder? I said, well, did you match them on smoking? Because you know what? Most people with lung cancer smoke. And if you're just took lung cancer patients that are smokers, and you took controls that are non-smokers, your wonderful biomarker may be a really great biomarker of smoking. It may be cotinine. Cumbeam is a great lung cancer marker, but it's of no use whatsoever as a lung cancer screen because we know already we can ask people if they're smokers. We already have that in this model, so we don't need it. You need all the covariates. So that's an example of something you need. So bias confounding, original hypothesis, meaning there's a difference between, here's another one, that you get a call from someone who says, I tested a biomarker, and it predicts liver cancer. In a cohort, it's strongly associated with liver cancer. And what you find out after talking with them is that they tested the biomarker versus 30 endpoints, and there was a statistical association with one cancer. And so, well, what's the probability that you get a significant association at a p-value of 0.05 of 1 in 20? So if you tested 30 endpoints, of course you're going to find one that's significant. So that's called data driven. And power calculations and validation are some other issues that are very important. So just a common question that epidemiologists get: how can you explain this? My grandmother smoked all her night, her life, she didn't exercise, didn't use a seatbelt, she ate bacon every day, she drank, she outlived all her doctors. How do you explain that? And the answer is that epidemiology is a probabilistic science. It's not deterministic. So you always get individual outliers. In fact, individual outliers are a mathematical certainty. You're always going to get them. So it's just something to keep in mind. Just a little. Okay, so what tools do epidemiologists use? And one very cool tool that is still being used are the maps. So there's cancer mortality maps and cancer incidence maps. And what these tend to show you is that cancer is geographically associated. And so here's an example showing the red in the south, and this is incidence, this is mortality from melanoma. And obviously, this is due to sun exposure, and melanoma is associated with sun. So you see a geographic pattern that's very indicative of sun. So lately, we have been doing some studies of circadian variation and looking at variation in cancer rates by time zone. So we look at the time zones, and we can see some associations with time zones. So I don't have time to go into that, but the maps are very, very helpful for these kinds of studies. And more sophisticated studies can now be done with satellite data using geographic information systems. It's a whole emerging area. And a lot of studies are done with SEER, which is Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results Program. So this covers 26% of the U.S. population. I believe it's 11 states, and it has data on incidence and survival and patient demographics, and first tumor site, tumor morphology, histology, and a lot of other cool information. And so it's ecologic data, meaning you don't have individual risk factor data. The covariate data, I told you, that's important. But it's very, very valuable and important. And it gives you, and it's sort of there's a ton of information that you can analyze online. And an example of how interesting this data is, if you look at cancer incidence data, you see a rise in cancer back in 1994 or so. And does anybody know what happens here? This is rise in men, and there's not a corresponding rise in women. So this was when they introduced PSA screening. So the rise was due to prostate. They discovered a lot of cases of prostate cancer due to PSA screening. So this was actually kind of a glitch in the data, an inaccuracy, or a, it's not exactly inaccurate. The data was accurate, but it was a something that had to be taken into account, and it was more prominent in African Americans than whites. There's incidence and mortality data, and many times when you see a big difference between incidence and mortality, one of the things it tells you is that there's an effective treatment. And in fact, there is an effective treatment for many kinds of pediatric malignancy, as you well know. So I mentioned to you that because epidemiology depends on statistical associations, there's a lot of attention given to proving causation. And so there's some classical criteria for proving a cause. And some of these criteria are that an association that we believe is reliable as a causal one should be a high risk, a high relative risk. It should be consistent over numerous studies. It should show a dose response. When you have more of whatever it is, the rate, the risk should go up. The cause should occur temporally before the cancer. That's always important. And the biology should make sense. There should be some kind of a mechanism that's in there. Really, there are other and more sophisticated and more direct approaches to get at this. One of them is called the Mendelian randomization. So I encourage you to go look this up and read about it. But basically, it involves doing a genome-wide association study on the factor and on the disease and looking to see if they share genetic etiologic factors, and that would be an element that would tend to support a causal association. And molecular epidemiology involves using biomarkers to infer mechanism, and mediation analysis involves a more complex kind of causal analysis. So epidemiologists use all of these to try and infer causality in a more sophisticated way. And this just shows with cigarettes how 3 cohort studies showed a beautiful dose response, a consistent dose response with cigarettes smoked per day. And they also showed a nice temporal relationship that it took time after cigarettes were introduced for lung cancer rates to rise. And also mechanistically it made sense, and this is a famous set of experiments by Oscar Auerbach, a pathologist in Louisiana, who did famous studies with smoking beagles, where he attached smoking machines to these beagles and then dissected their respiratory tree and showed that the exact same progressive changes occurred in the respiratory tree